afternoon. How does a person who started out carrying a backpack around some of the most remote parts of our beautiful national parks end up chairing our technical committee and dealing with all the bureaucracies associated with that?
Yeah, dealing with lighting. That's a good question. Early in my career, I was a young park ranger at Pinnacles National Park, a small park in California, and my work would often have me coming back home late. So I would be hiking at night and looking up in the sky. I was quite familiar with the night sky, being an amateur astronomer from a young age, and one day, really noticing that there's this new light in the horizon, this new light dome. And I watched it get worse and worse. And what I was watching was the light installations at the new Soledad prison. But at the time I didn't know that. And I reached out to my Park Service colleagues and asked them, are you experiencing the same thing? How do you measure this? What can be done about it? And I got a lot of responses back, and each one said the same thing. Each response said, I don't know, this is a concern that we have too, and when you learn something, please tell me. So that began the journey of, I sort of, I think this is the universe telling me I need to do something. And so what we did is we started a night skies team, a strike team that would figure out how to measure light pollution and quantify the beauty of the night. Measurement is the cornerstone of science, and it's the cornerstone of resource management. So that begat the journey. And so we reached out to the IDA. This is back in 1998, 99. Reached out to other astronomers, professional astronomers, and built some instrumentation to precisely measure the brightness of the night sky and to separate out the natural night sky from what was artificial. And it took us a couple of years to get a working camera system. But once we did, it took us around another year before we were able to find a dark sky. This was, really eye-opening. I mean, the camera was so sensitive, and through the camera and through this process, we were learning how to see better at night with our own eyes and discerning small details about what light pollution does to the environment, to our human vision, and to the landscape. And it was, in fact, I got the picture here. Can't see this very well, but this is the first natural night sky that we captured. This is Natural Bridges, Utah. And the first place we ever went that you could not see any artificial light. We did find some other places. The remote northwestern corner of Death Valley is quite dark, and there's several other of these sort of accidents of geography that are still dark, but an exceedingly rare resource. And what we found is that we were able to see light pollution from 200 miles away affecting parks. So what began as more of a science and engineering project of measuring small quantities of light became this really comprehensive process of forming a multi-person team in the Park Service to protect these areas. And to protect these dark sites, we had to chase down that pollution. So that's what brought me to lighting, because I guess an analogy might be air pollution. If you have air pollution where you live, you can make changes in your home, you can talk to your neighbor, just as we do with lighting, but you really aren't going to solve air pollution by just staying local. And for parks, if you had air pollution in a park, you would have to go look at the smokestacks. You would have to talk to the automakers, and essentially that is how my journey brought me from a park to where we are now, which is trying to marshal the brain trust, as you said, to figure out ways to stop light pollution at the source.
So that's interesting. You kind of went to the darkest places and turned back around and say, what's going on? There's such precious resources. And in fact, I think probably one of the first times I experienced the truly dark sky I didn't know it at the time probably, was also natural bridges. I remember camping there when I first came to the States, probably back in, gosh, it might have been 96, 90, maybe even earlier than that, maybe the mid 90s. We took a camping trip up and down the spine of Utah, and that was one of the most memorable parks, sitting out in the dark under those bridges, actually listening to a ranger talk about the stories of the people who inhabited that area long before we were there. It was just a magical time. And now that I know it's it was actually, I believe, Chad, the first international dark sky park
Yes.
designated. Now I want to go back with a little bit more knowledge and understanding, and see whether it's still naturally dark. So maybe we can move just briefly, Chad, maybe share a little bit about the technical committee, because I think you've got a really interesting perspective in kind of what you're trying to bring together in terms of the membership of the technical committee and what they're doing.
Sure. Well, I've been chair of the technical committee for coming up on 4 years now, I believe. And I think one of the things that we've made a point to do is to draw some diverse people to that committee. We want to have really differing opinions so that we are making, considering the full gamut of options. So we have specialists in ecological sensitivities of light, a specialist in sea turtles and such. We have urban planners. We have, traditional lighting designers. We have sports lighting designers and lighting researchers. And so, through these discussions, we really look at things at all sides. We don't always agree on some things, but it's an excellent forum to sort of hash out. It's a microcosm of a lot of the issues that we're facing in a larger sense. So we come up with recommendations. Either we institute some, from sort of ground up recommendations, or the IDA staff comes to the technical committee with some ideas, and we sharpen those ideas prior to implementation.
I certainly enjoyed participating in those committee meetings and hearing those diverse opinions, and I've learned a lot by it. And it's helped me when I get questions when I'm out there, and I wanted to kind of turn to that. Barely a day goes by when we don't get a question about LEDs and streetlights. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit, Chad, and really kind of set the context. It was I believe about a decade ago, we had this kind of perfect storm of new lighting technology. We could finally have actually a blue LED and produce white light. There was a drive to save energy, and then the economy collapsed, and the administration came along and started to invest lots of money in what they termed shovel-ready infrastructure that had those kind of energy-saving benefits as well. And that has really led to a transformation, I think, in the way that we light the night. And we've seen some real losses over the last decade. So I'm interested, because you've been with the organization for a long time, kind of what's your perspective on what happened, how did we respond, and what have we learned over the last decade about that issue that affects almost everybody certainly in this room is probably affected by this issue, and many people around the planet today are affected by this.
Yeah. So what a post-mortem on the LED revolution from a night skies perspective. In many ways, I mean, it's did we lose ground? Yes. In many places we did. Because of the IDA, is it better than what it would have been? Absolutely. When LED lighting, outdoor lighting, there's been so much retrofit of the street lighting. It's mostly done in many places. And that LED revolution is continuing into the area lighting, security lighting, home lighting. And we see the night sky getting brighter visually and with our instrumentation in many areas. So why is this? Of course, famously, it's the color. A lot of people have pointed at that. Many of the first LEDs were 5,000, 4,000, 3,500K. And that blue light is going to scatter more. Our eye is more sensitive to it. So the sky is going to appear brighter just based on the color. But there's some other reasons too. I think there's a lot of new installations. There was street lights, for example, added to areas sort of that weren't lighted before. And, you know, keep in mind, I picture your street light, your high pressure sodium street light before an LED came along, and it was probably dusty and that light bulb was dim. And there was a lot of reasons why replacing LEDs on a one-for-one basis just ended up making it brighter. A lot of lights, you know, were burned out or just very dirty drop lenses. So all that created a lot more light. But, you know, we need to realize something, that most of that LED lighting was shielded. And the IDA spent the first 20 years saying, shield the lights, shield the lights, shield the lights. And that was something that we thought was going to gain us a lot of ground. We were estimating, you know, at least 20%, probably 50%, or maybe even more reductions in light pollution because of shielding. Now, not all LED lighting is shielding, I know that. And the ones that aren't shielded are really bad. But most of it is. So we sort of got what we asked for. A bunch of shielded lights, and it hasn't necessarily helped us. So, you know, now, you know, I think using your term, Ruskin, like IDA was like back in 2010, probably first to step up and ring the bell saying, you know, blue light has some problems, folks. And that was good. We caused a stir, and there's been a large response to that. Now, we need to realize, we need to step away from this. I won't say we step away. We need to make sure that we aren't just talking about color, because we're setting ourselves up to make the same mistake twice, which is focusing on a single aspect of lighting. So the lighting principles for responsible outdoor lighting that IDA and the technical committee through the IDA has developed look at this holistically. And it's important for all of us to look at this holistically in our messaging, whether we're talking with our neighbor or talking to the city council. Right? So you guys all, should I quiz everybody on it?
Yeah, we should. We'll have a quiz later.
I have it right here.
Why don't you hit those principles just briefly, Chad, and then we can move on from there and maybe talk a little bit about how we're going to reclaim the night.
Yeah, there's 5 things. So we want to have light be useful. So let's only use light where it really needs to be. Light needs to be targeted, which is another term for shielding. It has to shine where it's intended to go.
Down, right? Not up. Not up on the building, down on the ground.
Yes, where it's most useful. We need to have low intensity. So we need to make sure, I mean, most of our lights are so much brighter than they need to be. So the language we use is turning it down. We need to have controls. When we talk about controls, we're talking about dimming, turning lights off at certain times, or having smart lighting that responds to say who's in the area, cars in the area. And then finally color. All those are important. And so we want to make sure that we're focusing on all of them and not just one aspect. Otherwise, the next revolution in lighting is going to address color and forget the other 4.
I think I've heard you say, Chad, that the only dark sky friendly light is the one that's turned off, removed, or never installed. After that, you're just into managing and mitigating and reducing.
Yeah, I don't think I said that, but that's a good way of thinking about it.
I'm sure you said something like
well, I didn't invent it.
You did not invent it. That is correct. So where do we go? I mean, actually, I was talking to someone many of you might have heard of, Chris Kaiber, the other day. And Chris Kaiber is a great researcher in Germany. He actually helps run this program with Connie, who chairs our outreach committee called the Globe at Night, where they have people going around the world measuring, visually observing, I think it's called the naked eye limiting magnitude, Chad, like basically a proxy for the number of stars you can see. And since 2010, we have basically been losing about, I think, 0.2 naked eye limiting magnitudes per year. We've lost about maybe it was something like 0.5. But basically, globally, average around the globe over the last decade, we have probably in many areas lost our ability to see half the stars in the sky. And Chris attributes that a lot to this overlighting and the introduction of LEDs. And in particular, Chad hit on this, but often they might do a watt for watt conversion. That means you're just blasting the area with light. So how do the lighting principles work together to allow us over time to kind of reclaim the night and change the arc of that curve, Chad?
So this is one place where the IDA can make a real impact, and that is coming up with the guidance, the expertise to shape good public policy and individual decisions on lighting. You know, we need to get tools into the hands of the city planners, the community activists, anyone concerned. It shouldn't just be lighting companies and lighting engineers who have that expertise. So this is a large part of our role, is finding solutions for cities, finding solutions for parks, and everything in between. So, and we need those solutions to address, you know, the wide range of environments out there, whether you have a highly sensitive environment or an urban environment, because even an urban environment is going to affect a remote area, as I've witnessed. So we need a way that we can talk about how to balance these 5 principles, trade-offs between them. Sometimes we come up with recommendations that are, you know, rigid recommendations. Thou shalt have at least this, at least this, at least this. There's 2 problems with that. When you have that approach, the first thing people do is they go right up to the maximum allowable, and then they run with it. Like, they maximize everything. And the second problem with it is if there's some particular need that is can't be met because we have a 2700K or 3000K limitation, or we have certain recommendations, sometimes our whole message gets thrown out. So we need a way that we can talk about these important nuances that the engineers are concerned about, that maybe the city safety officer is concerned about, the police force. So we can say, okay, well, maybe there's a situation where you need a little bit more light here because of pedestrian vehicle conflicts. What are we going to do to balance that out? And maybe that is, you know, changing the timing of the light so it's bright for just the first few hours in the evening until the businesses are closed. Or maybe we talk about, okay, well, then this other area has to be darker. We need to think in terms of that budgeting and those trade-offs and the whole package of these lighting principles. We are going to need to add to your question there, Ruskin. We're going to need to track improvements. We talk a lot about tracking impacts. So, you know, to motivate the public, but we need to, when we have success stories, we need to show how that's been successful and why. So there's a lot of elements to how do we restore the night, not just make it not as bad, but actually get back to where we were in the past.
Is it fair to say, Chad, that, you know, we're certainly moving in the direction where technically we have the tools at our disposal, and in fact an LED light is a great resource to have when it's deployed well, given their controllability. You can aim them optically, you can dim them down immediately, and what we need is more that holistic approach and that kind of raise the awareness. It comes back to raising awareness that the night is an incredible resource and that light pollution affects us all, whether we know it or not. And it's the double-edged sword of the LED. So maybe we can close talking about like the promise of some of this technology when deployed well.
It is a double-edged sword, and we need to learn how to wield that sword. LEDs aren't inherently bad. They have a lot of, the controllability on it is tremendous. Integrating it with smart circuits. You know, you could have your lights respond to whether there's snow or ice on the road or not, or whether there's moonlight out. There's so many things you could do with it that has really been untapped. So we have got to move into that area of controls and make some strong recommendations there. And we also are going to need to, I think, probably going to differentiate our message a little bit, saying this is the minimum that you need to do, but this is really where you should be. And we need to talk about, okay, when you're in a sensitive environment, when you have these other situations, when you're in a disadvantaged community where streetlights are going to be shining in people's windows who can't afford nice blinds, you know, what are the things that you're going to do? And so that having, you know, being able to say, this is the minimum we think is acceptable for responsible lighting, and then this is where we think you should be for best practices. That nuance needs to be brought to bear as well.
And then talking, Pete's on the line here. Pete's our technical director, and then talking with Pete recently, he's been talking with people in the manufacturing industry who are talking about, those of you who know your Kelvin limits, manufacturers in a few years now, 2200 Kelvin fixtures, luminaires will be much more widely available with less of an energy efficiency than they are today. So there's the work we've been doing to build awareness of this issue, and the blue light, I think, is slowly, maybe it's too slowly, but not as fast as we want, but is translating into innovations. And now we need to translate that into the demand so we can build the demand for these spaces and protect places.
Yeah, and that's all part of the IDA's partnership with IES is bringing these things to market faster, these new solutions, bringing acceptance, you know, and having a nuanced discussion about the different lighting principles that the lighting engineers and designers out there can respect.
So before I turn it over to Q&A, I have a couple minutes to chat. What message would you like the folks on the line to take away and help spread in their communities?
One message, huh? Just one.
No,
you know, we are going to we're going to win. We're going to be successful because we had strengths on both sides of this conservation issue, and part of it, half of it is motivating people, half of it is conservation actions or fixing lighting.
Yeah.
And it's so important to do both. We constantly need to motivate people, to show them what's going on, to show them a better way through technical guidance. So we, you know, I see my role as chair of the technical committee is really trying to make sure that we have conservation actions that are very strong. And I guess I would say, you know, my advice would be to learn what you can about lighting, about these 5 principles. And so that when you talk to your neighbor, when you talk to your city council, whatever you may end up doing, that you can effectively communicate this. Because we can't afford to just focus on one aspect, one of these 5 principles. We've got to be holistic about it. And if we are, we will make the best use of this LED technology that has so far been a thorn in our side.
Just to tout one program we pushed out actually on Earth Day during International Dark Sky Week this year, we released our home lighting assessment, which is really based upon these principles with the belief that, it starts at home. And that was kind of a soft launch. We're in the process of revising that and looking forward to really taking that out more broadly so that people can really start to understand how this applies both at the community level, but also in the places that they have a say, directly have a say in how they're led. So that was a good example for me of how the principles that the technical committee are adopting can be pushed down into the programs and the actions. And I think our job is to make it easy for all of you and all of the advocates around the world to make this stuff simple. You need to make it simple. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ruskin.
Thank you.